You are now listening to the Vegan Stuff podcast with Caavakushi.
In today's episode, our hosts, Sam and Kim, are going to be talking about the incredible and inspiring influencers, That Vegan Couple. If you simply can't get enough of us, go to caavakushi.com and sign up for our vegan newsletter. And we also have some good news. We will be releasing our first ever cookbook pretty soon, so stay tuned. Hey, don't forget to follow us on our socials too.
All right, let's dive into this pile of YouTube videos you've sent over about veganism. Looks like we've got a bit of everything here. Personal stories, health tips, ethical debates, even a hunter in the mix. Should be interesting.
It's fascinating, isn't it? This whole range of perspectives on food choices today. We've got influencers dipping their toes into veganism, couples sharing their long-term experiences, and some pretty big questions about health and the environment along the way.
Yeah, for sure. Some of the claims in these videos are pretty wild, curing asthma just by cutting out dairy, acne disappearing on a plant-based diet. We've even got a story about candida and some unique drink choices.
Lots to unpack, for sure. But before we get into the details of those claims, let's make sure we're on the same page about what veganism actually is. I mean, we're talking about more than just a diet, right? It's an ethical stance.
Okay, so it's about recognizing that animals deserve respect, just like any living being.
Exactly. It comes down to this idea of speciesism, the belief that humans are superior to other animals. Veganism challenges that. It's saying that exploiting animals simply because we can is like saying it's okay to discriminate based on species.
That makes sense. But some of these YouTubers, like Melanie Murphy and Cheyenne from Shy Curves, seem to hit some roadblocks when they try going fully plant-based. They mention struggling with social pressure, difficulty finding vegan options, and even some negative health experiences.
Right, and those are some common concerns we hear, so it's important to address them. That vegan couple, the duo who've been vegan long-term, they really emphasize the importance of education and planning. They suggest that a lot of those struggles come from not having all the information, which leads to overly restrictive diets, missed nutrients, and ultimately people giving up.
So you're saying it's not just about willpower, it's about strategy.
Exactly. Like Cheyenne mentioned having to reintroduce animal products because she wasn't getting enough nutrients on a vegan diet and how restrictive it felt with her PCOS and IBS.
That's interesting because That Vegan Couple actually addresses that whole veganism is too restrictive thing. They say there are tons of plant-based options out there, and it's more about focusing on nutrient-dense foods and eating enough.
They make a good point. And they even flip the script on Cheyenne's experience, pointing out that dairy can worsen some health issues people blame on veganism.
You mean instead of being the problem, a plant-based diet could actually be the solution? Now that's a twist.
That's their argument, and they back it up with some science. They're suggesting that a well-planned vegan diet can provide all the nutrients you need and even help with certain health problems.
Okay, so it's not just tofu and lettuce. But what about those arguments we often hear against veganism? Like Melanie Murphy brings up this circle of life idea.
Yes. The circle of life argument often revolves around this idea that humans are naturally meant to eat meat because we're omnivores.
Right, and they often point to those indigenous cultures and historical diets as proof.
Exactly. But plant-based proponents, like That Vegan Couple, they counter that by highlighting the difference between those traditional practices and the reality of factory farming today. They argue that just because humans have eaten meat throughout history, it doesn't justify the suffering we see in factory farms today.
Especially now that we have the knowledge and resources to thrive without animal products, right?
That's their point. And it's something you see throughout these videos, this idea that we have a moral responsibility to avoid causing harm when we can.
Which brings us to those intense factory farm images. Have to admit, those are hard to watch. But That Vegan Couple seems to be saying we can't just ignore the reality of our food, even if it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, they're not going for shock value, but for transparency. They believe that if we're going to eat animal products, we should at least be aware of where they come from.
And they seem to suggest that once you really see factory farming, it's hard to justify supporting it.
That's their stance, yeah.
Which leads us to the face-off with the hunter. Talk about a clash of viewpoints. He's arguing that hunting is natural, part of the circle of life we were just discussing. But even he seems taken aback when confronted with factory farm conditions.
It's a really good illustration of how our brains grapple with conflicting ideas. We can hold beliefs or do things that go against our values without realizing it. The hunter might enjoy the challenge of hunting, but that doesn't mean he supports unnecessary cruelty.
And in the end, he agrees to try a 22-day vegan challenge. Maybe there's hope for us all.
What's interesting is how that vegan couple emphasizes that even small changes can have a big impact. They're not demanding everyone go vegan overnight. They just want people to question their assumptions and really think about the consequences of their choices.
So, takeaway number 1. It's not about being perfect, it's about being mindful. And wow, we've already covered a lot. Ethics, health, even a bit of brain science. Okay, so let's dig into those health claims from the videos. That vegan couple looks fantastic, and they're really raving about the benefits of a plant-based diet. They talk about curing things like asthma, eczema, allergies, just from cutting out dairy and lowering fat intake. It seems almost too good to be true. So what's the science behind all of this?
Well, it's true that vegan couple makes some bold claims, but separating those personal stories from the science is key. So let's break it down. They talk a lot about dairy being congesting, and while that might sound, kind of simplistic, there's actually some interesting biology behind it.
Okay, yeah, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
All right, so think about it this way. Dairy has this protein called casein, right? And some people have trouble digesting it. That can actually trigger an immune response, like their body sees casein as a threat and starts fighting it off.
Ah, so it's like the body is waging war on cheese.
Kind of, and that creates inflammation. Not just in the gut, but sometimes it affects other parts of the body too.
So it's like a dairy-induced domino effect. That inflammation could show up as asthma, eczema, allergies, all sorts of things.
That's the idea. Now, not everyone reacts to dairy this way. Some people handle it just fine. But for those with sensitivities, cutting it out can be a game changer. They see less inflammation and their symptoms improve.
Makes sense. What about that emphasis on a low-fat diet? That vegan couple is really into that 8-0-10-10 thing.
Right. The 8-0-10-10 lifestyle is central to their approach. It means getting 80% of your calories from carbs, 10% from fat, 10% protein. It totally flips the typical Western diet on its head. While some fat is important, they argue that too much, even healthy fats, can actually contribute to inflammation.
So it's about finding that sweet spot.
Exactly. And a diet that prioritizes fruits, veggies, and starchy carbs naturally means you're eating less fat overall. This shift in micronutrients can be really powerful for some people, reducing inflammation and improving their overall health.
Wow, that's fascinating. Okay, we have to talk about the Candida case. That one really threw me for a loop. They said a high-carb, low-fat vegan diet helps someone overcome chronic Candida after years of struggling with it. But isn't sugar supposed to worsen Candida?
That's the common belief, right? Sugar feeds Candida. But that vegan couple, they challenge that. They're saying it's not necessarily the sugar itself that's the issue, but how our body handles it when we eat too much fat.
Hold on, I think I'm following. So it's more nuanced than just sugar is bad.
Exactly. Their theory is that excess fat in our diet can mess with our insulin sensitivity. When our cells become resistant to insulin, glucose, which is basically sugar, doesn't get into the cells efficiently, so blood sugar levels rise. And that's where the trouble really starts.
Because all that extra sugar in the bloodstream is like a buffet for Candida.
Exactly. By lowering fat intake and focusing on whole unprocessed carbohydrates, they believe we can improve our insulin sensitivity, regulate our blood sugar, and essentially make it less hospitable for Candida to thrive.
That's a serious shift in perspective. So you're saying carbs, when eaten the right way, could be part of the solution, not the enemy.
That's their proposition. And they have the story of that woman who found relief to back it up. Of course, one person's experience isn't the same as a scientific study, but it's definitely something to think about, right?
Totally. It shows how much we still don't know about nutrition and how differently our bodies respond to food. But these are just a few specific cases. What about the bigger picture? Does going vegan really offer any overall health benefits?
Great question. And one that researchers are really digging into these days. There's more and more research suggesting that plant-based diets, especially those lower in fat and processed foods, are linked to a lower risk of chronic diseases like heart disease, type 2 diabetes, even some cancers.
It's like taking that old saying, you are what you eat, to a whole new level.
Exactly. Many of these chronic diseases stem from inflammation and oxidative stress in the body. And guess what? Diets high in animal products, processed junk, and unhealthy fats can worsen both.
So when you go plant-based, you're not just ditching those harmful things, you're also loading up on antioxidants, fiber, and all the good stuff that helps our bodies thrive, right?
Exactly. It's like a double whammy. You eliminate the bad and load up on the good. But it's not just about our own health, is it? Those videos you sent, some of them talked about the environmental impact, the social side of veganism. Adds a whole other layer.
For sure. That vegan couple, they seem really concerned about the planet. They mentioned deforestation, water scarcity, the state of our oceans. Pretty heavy stuff.
Important stuff. The environmental impact of animal agriculture is huge. It's a major player in greenhouse gas emissions, deforestation, water pollution, you name it. And it leads to a loss of biodiversity, too.
Yeah, it's like this chain reaction. And we don't always connect the dots back to our plates, you know.
Right. And that's where this idea of a food print comes in. Shifting towards more plant-based eating can significantly reduce our impact. It's about being conscious about our choices.
I see what you mean. Okay, changing gears a bit. What about the social aspect of it all? The Vlogbrothers mentioned the challenges of going against the grain, feeling isolated or judged. That definitely resonated with me.
Absolutely. Social pressure can be a huge obstacle for people considering veganism, especially if they constantly have to justify their choices or answer questions like, but where do you even get your protein?
Oh, tell me about it. That gets old fast.
It does. And that vegan couple addresses that head on, actually. They talk about the amazing sense of community you find in the vegan world. It's real solidarity, you know? Yeah. It can really help with those feelings of isolation.
Finding your people, your tribe.
That's it. And look, as veganism becomes more common, more mainstream, I think those social barriers are starting to crumble. Making compassionate choices is becoming more and more normal, you know?
That's encouraging. It's always easier to make changes when you feel supported.
Absolutely. And think about it. The choice to eat vegan often comes from this deep place of compassion for animals, for the planet. It's about putting your values into action in a really tangible way.
It really is about connecting the dots, isn't it? From our own health to the planet, even our relationships with other people. This deep dive has given me a lot to think about. But before we wrap up, there's this one moment in that vegan couple's video that really stayed with me. It was during their conversation with the hunter.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Pretty intense exchange.
They asked him this really simple but powerful question. If we accept that animals don't want to die, how do we justify continuing to eat them? It really made me stop and think. What are your thoughts on that?
It's such a direct question, isn't it? It gets right to the core of the ethical debate about how we treat animals. It forces us to look at our own assumptions, our biases even. It's like they're asking us to confront this disconnect between what we do and what we believe.
Exactly. It made me realize that a lot of us, we have this kind of like mental block between the food on our plate and the animal it came from. That question from that vegan couple, it breaks right through that.
Totally. And whether or not you agree with their stance, it's still a really important question to consider, you know? It encourages us to be more self-aware about our choices and the impact they have.
Like they say, awareness is the first step. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling super inspired to explore plant-based eating even more after all this. Any final words of wisdom for our listeners who might be feeling the same way?
I'd say just go for it. Have fun with it. Vegan food is so diverse, so delicious. There are endless possibilities out there. You never know. You might just discover your new favorite dish.
Exactly. And hey, if those glowing faces in the videos are any indication, maybe a plant-based adventure will lead to more than just amazing meals.
You just never know what positive changes you might see.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the world of veganism. We hope you found it thought-provoking, inspiring, and maybe even a little bit delicious. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening. We hope you liked this episode. If you did, we'd really appreciate it if you could give us 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on. Also, we would be so appreciative if you could just share this episode or this podcast with all your friends and family who are vegans or vegan friendly. We're also really excited because we are going to be launching something really cool pretty soon on the site, so keep an eye out for that. And we will see you really soon with a new episode.